Welcome to the Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, where every death had a life and every life had a story. My name is Jennie Johnson, and we are missing Diane today, but she has been invited to attend a volunteer recognition this evening. And so I told her that was just as important as recording the podcast because she puts in a lot of hours at Evergreen Cemetery, as we all know. So we will see her next week and hear all about the volunteer event, possibly. She was a little hesitant about going. She's not one necessarily for getting recognized all the time for all the work she does, but she deserves the recognition. So I'm glad she's decided to go to that. So today, you won't have to listen to just me droning on, though. We have two very special guests joining us today. But before we get into that and before I introduce them, just a quick reminder, we do have our merchandise available for purchase now. So if you want the hoodies, the t-shirts, the coffee mugs, travel mugs, all of those things, they are available on our Etsy shop. The shop is the OE Cemetery, all one word in this case, oecemetery.etsy.com. There's also a link directly to it on our website. You just go to the little part of it that says store, click on that, it'll take you right there. And you can get all the goodies there. Thank you to those of you who've already purchased items. It's very exciting to see those orders come through, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you tag us in them on social media at some point, in your shirts and your hoodies, or using your coffee mugs, drinking your tea. So whatever you'd like to do with that, we would love to see that. And thank you very much for your support, because it's very helpful. Everything that we get from the shop and from this merchandise does help to support the fees that are required for keeping this podcast up and running. So we appreciate you very much. So today, our two guests that are joining us came to us as the result of one of our other guests. So back in May, we had Mel Bennett with Life Forest Cemetery on the show, and she talked about how she founded that cemetery and the story about her mom, which was super touching. And that particular life forest that Mel talked about is located in Hillsborough, New Hampshire. And at the time we had her on, they were just opening, getting ready to do their grand opening for their second location in Auburn, Maine. And so today we are joined by Chelsea Eaton and Michelle Melaragno, who are the founders of Life Forest Whistle Ridge. So welcome, ladies, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We are super excited to have you. And one of the things Mel did, and we'll get into the story a little bit later into the episode here, but Mel had shared an incredible story about the first interment that you guys did there at the cemetery. But before we talk about that, I kind of would like you to tell us a little bit more about Whistle Ridge and its mission and how it's different from the Life Forest in New Hampshire.
So Whistle Ridge is, as you said, the first host site of the Life Forest company as a whole. It took probably close to 2 years from the initial conversation with Mel about, hey, you guys want to open a host site here on your land, to actually getting to the grand opening that we had this May. It was a very interesting process, and I don't think you realize what it's like to try and open a cemetery until you actually do it. So we had our grand opening in May, and one of the primary differences between what we're doing at Whistle Ridge compared with what they're doing in Hillsborough is we're offering a completely natural forested burial option. So we're still doing the 3 foot by 3 foot square plots and burying cremated remains. That's the same. But where in New Hampshire they're primarily planting trees, we are utilizing the mature forest that we already have and just offering natural woodland burials in our established groves.
Which I think is so cool.
Yeah, we do too. We're developing a trail network. We have a couple of new groves in development that we've been working on this fall. And our mission is very much the same as the Life Forest mission as a whole, which is legacy protection and land conservation. Those are both things that really go hand in hand with what we're doing here with our property, and what's made it such a good relationship with Mel and the Life Forest team to open this location here in Auburn.
And maybe explain. So, most of our episodes, when we talk about cemeteries, we're talking about the more traditional cemeteries where we have headstones and a casket burial and all of that. And not that the idea of an all natural burial like you're doing is new, because I mean, we've done them for centuries in other parts of the world, but maybe explain to our audience, because there's a lot of people that I don't think are familiar with that idea or the concept of doing these natural burials. Can you elaborate on that just a little bit more for them?
Yeah, definitely. So we are not a full body cemetery. We are interring cremated remains and
Mm-hmm.
potentially in the future composted human remains as well.
Perfect.
Uh, we're also people can be buried with their pets. There's no exclusion to pets here whatsoever. So, but primarily we're burying cremated human remains. So our plot sizes are much smaller than a traditional cemetery. They're 3 foot by 3 foot square, because that's all that's really necessary for the volume of cremains that
Right.
human creates. There are no headstones here. We utilized GPS coordinates to mark where every plot is located, and then upon burial, we use about a 4-inch square marker with a label on it that gives the name and the dates and any other information that the family might want on there. And so we just have that small marker that marks the actual location after a burial. And then also folks can put a QR code on there that people can scan, and it would take them to an obituary or what have you.
Right.
So, we've developed what we call groves, which are basically just sections of the forest that we have deemed, ideal as far as elevation. Obviously we don't want to be in low, wet areas. We
Right.
don't want to be on ledge. We don't want to be in a place that would be impossible to dig with too many root systems. So we've worked with a mapping specialist who came out quite a while ago, maybe a year or more ago, and we mapped multiple locations that would be ideal for groves. Our very first grove that we developed has about 35 possible plot locations in it, which is a fairly large
Right.
space. And what else? What am I missing?
The 3 by 3 plots do not abut each other. So whereas
Well, there's some space.
there's actually quite a bit of space in between each plot. Whereas like if you go to a traditional cemetery, everything is very meticulously aligned in a very
Right.
specific grid. So this is very
It's very natural.
yeah,
It's based on what's there. So obviously we can't, we go around the trees and the rocks and the things. And we pick the spots that will accept a burial. And one of the things we also can do is folks, when we open a plot for a burial, if a person has multiple sets of cremains, whether it's multiple people or maybe a person and their pets, we can inter multiple sets of cremains at that time in that plot
as will fit.
as will fit. I think we've got a volume limitation, but you can,
Right.
we can accommodate quite a bit. And anybody and everybody that goes in that plot will be deed recorded that they are there. And I think that can make it for some people more economical because they don't necessarily have to purchase multiple plots next to each other. They still could if they needed to, but that's one of the things we're doing to make this very approachable for people.
Well, and the nice thing about if somebody is cremated, you can hang on to those remains for a while before you have to do anything with them. So that that makes a nice option for a family plot too, that way. So you can put everybody together and everything. So how did the two of you become involved with the idea of forming a cemetery and especially a conservation cemetery?
Initially, Mel had, this is Michelle speaking, Mel had originally gotten in touch with me regarding my other business, Compassionate Composting, because she had just received permission or approval there in New Hampshire to also bury composted human remains and composted animal remains. And as she was doing her research, she came across my website and got in touch with me to, I think, initially probably to figure out what my business was all about, and then also to ask if they had folks asking about composting for their pets, she could refer them to me. So that was sort of how we got introduced to each other, and they came up here for a visit to see my facility, and it just over these 3.5 years or so, it has just become an obvious what's the word I want? Extension, an obvious connection, and we're very aligned on our how we do things and how we go through life, and how we feel about all of these things.
And I think it's wonderful. I've told people here in Colorado where we're at about your cemeteries. And as far as I'm aware, we don't have anything like that in Colorado. And when I've told people about it, they get very excited about the concept of having something that's much more natural, much more welcoming to a lot of people. That, a traditional cemetery can sometimes scare people off, or people feel like they have to be very somber and very sad. And I mean, I personally don't feel that way, but I spend a lot of time in cemeteries, so I see it a little differently. But for people who aren't spending the time in the cemeteries, they like the concept of being able to be out in nature when they're visiting their deceased loved ones, and getting the benefits of a nature walk or sitting under the trees and not feeling the sort of depressing side of death as much, because it's creating something beautiful and it's going back into the earth, and we're using the earth in a better way than maybe we have traditionally. So I think that appeals to a lot of people, and I would love to see more life forests everywhere.
Well, I think the long-term goal
is with Mel.
Yeah. I mean, the long-term goal for the business is, Mel says she wants to see a life forest in every state, and I have no doubt that Mel will get there. It will take some time, but she will get there. There's no stopping her.
Nope, there is not. And a lot of people don't think about starting a cemetery. That's not something you generally are thinking about, but the way Mel came about it in her story does make it more of a special thing in that case. But because of that, I think you're right. I think we'll see it in every state eventually. And listeners, I don't know if I said it at the beginning, but if you want to know Mel's story, if you didn't hear it before, it's episode 186. We recorded it back in May, and Mel Bennett was the guest. And again, we started with the whole concept of Life Forest Cemetery, and she talked about how they developed the one there in New Hampshire. So what Mel emailed me about initially when she introduced me to Michelle and Chelsea was, and I believe this was your first interment there at Whistle Ridge, but it was a gentleman named William R. Harland who has a very interesting story. His cremains came to you a little bit differently than most people's loved ones come to you. So, do you want to tell us a little bit
Correct.
about who William was, William R. Harland, and how he even came to be at Whistle Ridge?
Sure. So he actually, I'm not sure if you're aware of this. William is my great great grandfather,
Right.
and my mother received a letter in the mail saying that she identifying her as the great granddaughter of William Harland. She knew very very little about her father's side of the family. He was
Mm-hmm.
very quiet. Didn't He didn't talk a whole lot about family. He didn't tell any stories about his upbringing, anything like that. So she knew nothing about him. This letter, when she received it, was sort of received with a healthy dose of skepticism and concern about whether this was some sort of a fishing expedition or who knows in
Which I
these
don't
times.
doubt, or I don't, I think that's just fine.
Right. Right, right. So I told her, I said, just hang, don't respond to this. Let me do a little bit of research and see what this is about. And I got in touch with the woman who had written the letter, who ended up she volunteered all of her time
Mm-hmm.
uh, to attack this very large
Backlog.
backlog on it. Very huge. Yeah. So anyway, what we learned is that William's cremains were one set of cremains within about 3,500 sets of cremains that had been stumbled upon, if you will, at Oregon State Hospital. Oregon State Hospital still is a mental health facility,
Mm-hmm.
psychiatric hospital, and had some uh, much. The name that they have now is much nicer than the one you can imagine. You can imagine what it was called 50
Right.
years
Back
ago
in the
or 100
30s
years
when,
ago. Right,
yes.
right. It happens to be the facility where the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was actually filmed, with Jack Nicholson, and
Mm-hmm.
very amazing and incredible movie. But so when I got in touch with Phyllis, she explained further what exactly this was all about. She directed us to take a look at a documentary called The Library of Dust, and it explained how these cremains were found in a random outbuilding that it took them a while to find a key to it. And I'm not quite sure how she got involved, but she did all the genealogy research and found descendants of folks whose cremains were just sitting in these copper canisters on shelves in this little outbuilding. Um, Interestingly, just before we did his burial, I got in touch with her again, and she told me that to date, out of those 3,500 sets of cremains, they have managed to get about 1,200 sets of cremains into the hands of a descendant or a close family friend
Which
or
is
something. Of
absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible work that she has done. She went through the 3,500 sets and then sort of circled back around. And
Mm-hmm.
in the 8 or 10 years it's been since she's been doing this, of course, more people have done DNA tests, with uh, genealogical research and that sort of thing. So they've been
Mm-hmm.
able to find more and more people on the second round of going
Wow.
through all of those
Just
cremains.
imagine sitting there going through that list of names, because at least, I mean, the canisters were marked in most cases, but just being able to start going through them and finding people, it can take, I mean,
Right.
genealogy research can sometimes be difficult when
Yes.
names are misspelled or records get lost or things like that. And the fact that she's dedicated so much of her time to locating
Right.
these family members is absolutely incredible.
Yeah. And they do a memorial service I believe every October now. Um, of course, since discovering their cremains, they built a beautiful memorial wall,
Yes.
and a very lovely building that showcases the copper canisters, which are really works of art in themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and every year they they do the memorial event and read folks' names and that sort of thing. They've done a really good job of sort of righting that wrong, if you will. Um,
Yes. And what's really cool about it is when they do locate family and they are able to get the canister to a family member, they leave that little niche that's in the memorial empty
yes,
after that. So you can
yeah,
see who's been claimed since they started all of that. And I think
yeah,
that's a really special thing to visit. And you can go visit the memorial there at the hospital, but it's very cool.
right, yeah, yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about Harland's life and how, I mean, this hospital is located obviously in Oregon and you're in Maine. So completely across the country from each other.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, we don't know a whole lot about his life. We know that um, he was very young when his family came from England to the United States. Um, Interestingly, there's some uh, I'm not sure if it's a discrepancy or what you want to call it, but some records indicate that he was born in England prior to the family coming to the United States. Other records say that he was born here in the United States. So I think that's probably true of most families who were, immigrating and
Mm-hmm.
hoping that their family would stay together.
Right.
Um, So, we know that yes, he spent a good part of his life on the West Coast, but also the younger years of his life in uh, more sort of in the I think Iowa. I don't
Okay.
recall. Somewhere in the middle,
In the Midwest there. Yeah.
in the Midwest area.
Going west.
Yeah.
Throughout his
Right.
life.
Yeah,
And we
as
don't
they get
know
older.
why.
Yeah, we don't know. He works.
He was a carpenter and I believe did some fishing.
Did some
right?
fishing. Yeah, we
In
know that his grandson, my mother's father, um, did some panning for gold out
Mm-hmm.
west, and we assume, based on a little bit of information we've received, that it was as a result of sort of being out there where his father and grandfather, William Harland, were living at the time.
Which would make sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so at the time now, and we mentioned earlier, so the name of the hospital at the time was the Oregon State Hospital for the Insane, which
Yeah.
again, we're not using that term anymore, thankfully, for mental illness, because in most cases it doesn't apply.
Right.
There are cases though, and we've mentioned it in other episodes with other hospitals. Sometimes it really was a mental illness. Sometimes these hospitals though also took on other types of illnesses, um,
Right.
because that was where the doctors were. So they might also house tuberculosis patients and things like that. It looks like, though, in Harland's case, he was admitted in 1938 to the hospital,
Yeah.
and he died about a year later ish,
Correct.
from heart and kidney problems while he was there. So, again, I don't think you had a ton of records, but you got a little bit of what was going on in his life. How is it that then, so obviously he was cremated after his death and then put into this canister. Um, and so I'm assuming at that point they didn't have any family that they knew of to contact at that point?
He did have a living family. Um, he had a son and a daughter. It was his son that, I hate the word committed him to
Right.
that facility, but brought him to that facility. And all of the information that was given about William was provided by William's son when
Okay.
he entered that facility. Why his son did not claim his remains, we don't know. Um, there's actually there's a little bit to be found, on regarding William's son and daughter, but not very much at all. And I've tried to find sort of descendants of theirs too, to say, hey, this is what's going on. We've just buried him here in Maine. Just would like to let folks know, but it's
Right.
been very difficult to find anyone to contact.
Well, hopefully someday in the future, there'll be that other descendant that starts getting
Right.
really into genealogy and uploading more information into the
Yeah.
digital record somewhere so that maybe more of his story can be told
Right.
later on. So he was your first burial there at the cemetery. How did this, like, being, especially since you're a descendant of his, how did that impact putting together this first interment for you guys?
I had been thinking about it for a while. Of course, when he arrived to us, this was in 2016, or arrived to my mom, basically
Right.
then he just kind of went and sat on now her shelf at her house instead of at Oregon State Hospital. We've told his stories multiple times over the years. And I'd been thinking about it for a while, and I mentioned it to my mom to say, what do you think about William being our first burial at our newly established cemetery? And she was over the moon about it.
Aw.
I wasn't quite sure how she would feel about it. We talked about the fact that he obviously never really lived on the East Coast, so
Right.
this isn't really home to him, other than the fact that we are his descendants.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, but it felt right, and it it felt like we were finally able to provide him with something that was much more respectful, and honor him in a way that hadn't been done. Um,
Yes.
so I think we were very, very honored to be able to do that for him. And of course, he died long before even my mother was born, so
Right.
she never met him. She never heard about him, and of course, I didn't either. So we didn't really feel that traditional sense of loss or sadness, but at the same time, there was still an interesting level of emotion wrapped up in all of it. I think for all of us,
Yeah,
it was kind of surprising.
It did get emotional. I mean, it was very meaningful. It was
Yeah.
very impactful because when I was talking earlier about how we put the tags on the graves upon
Mm-hmm.
burial. You look at his birth and death date, and and the poor guy. I mean, it took nearly 100 years
Yeah,
for
Yeah.
him to be,
probably buried or
for him to be, what's the word?
Claimed by his family again.
Yeah,
yeah, be properly
to be
memorialized.
recognized. Yeah. And I remember when we were doing the ceremony, I was just, that's the part that sticks out for me. It's just like, oh my God, when you 1938,
1939, he died.
1939.
Yeah, yeah,
This poor guy has been waiting. Well, it has just been such a journey for not only
85
his
years.
life and then his death, but then his remains. What a journey.
Yeah.
For this person and their memory and their legacy of them. And now he's finally here for whatever that's worth, for whatever
Yeah.
that means. But it means
Yeah.
something.
Oh yeah.
And I think part of it for me too is with, again, with what little bit of information we have about him, the work that he did, the jobs that he had were, farming. I mean, we're in agriculture here, so there's a
Mm-hmm.
connection with that. He did some fishing, he did some carpentry, but all of it is in line with what we do, and I imagine him being um, very glad to be in a place that is um, natural and is out in nature and it's
Mm.
in a conservation space. Um, to
Yeah, I
me, it
would
just
think
feels
he
safe
probably spent a lot of his life when he was healthy and stuff, probably outdoors doing what he
outside.
did.
Yeah, yeah,
So, and I think it's beautiful that even though there's a lot of holes to his story still, and especially after his death, like you said, he had children, but they didn't claim his cremains later on. So, and we don't know that part of the story, but the fact that you have him now and you were able to give him this burial and you were able to create a marker for him and you have some information, his story after 85 years is not being forgotten anymore. Like
right.
his name is being remembered. What little you know about him is being remembered. So his story is there again, which is something
Yeah,
that, and I kudos to the hospital in Oregon because they are trying so hard with their volunteers and
yes,
everything to remember everybody that was in that building when they discovered it. And
yeah,
they're trying to, find that they're still working. This is a long process
yes.
of trying to
Oh
do
yeah,
to reach out to descendants and figure out where these people should be going. But I so appreciate that again, they too are trying to help remember these stories so that these people aren't forgotten, especially in the situations in which they may have been placed in that particular facility
yeah, yeah,
for the times, because we all know years and years ago, it was not a great thing to have to go to one of those facilities in most cases. So,
yeah.
um,
We have a
I don't
facility
know a whole
near
lot about.
us here. It's just 9 miles from us here. That is very, very similar. It's no longer a mental health facility. The whole campus, if you will, is a huge complex. It was empty for many, many years, and then someone bought it and they rehabilitated it, and it's done a beautiful job. It's absolutely
Oh,
gorgeous
good.
and stunning now. But the history of it is absolutely tragic, and
Yeah.
it's very similar to the Oregon State Hospital um, stories that we hear. The one here was actually called the Maine School for the Feeble-Minded,
Ugh.
if you can
That's even
even
a worse
imagine,
term, I almost think, than
right?
insane.
Right? So yeah, yeah, it's interesting how things change over time, but it was, as we learned more about the Oregon hospital, we couldn't believe the similarities to the one that's right here, right down the road from us.
Right. Well, and thinking about how they used to treat, especially again, like I said, a lot of these facilities treated not only mental illnesses, but also physical ailments together.
Mhm.
But some of these places really did not treat patients well. The types of
Correct.
No.
treatments that they were doing, and yes, it was experimental, and yes, we were trying to learn, but sometimes it
Yeah.
just felt, when you read about it
Yes.
or you see stuff, you're like, it just felt so cruel.
Mhm.
And the fact that we are now in a place where we recognize that that wasn't the best way to handle those cases, and we can actually give some of these patients their humanity back, I think is
Yeah.
wonderful, because they
Yes.
deserve to have their humanity, even if they've been long dead. I mean, they still deserve to have that little bit of humanity in their story back. So, with all of that said, how has all of this? So, creating a cemetery. Obviously, you were doing the composting, but now you've created the cemetery. So now you're coming more full circle with death. How has this, for both of you, your perspective on death and grief changed through your involvement in creating a cemetery, in bringing Harland home, and all of those things?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, it's for me, I don't know so much that my perspective on things has changed too much. I think from a young age I had a very distinct awareness of death, and I have always kind of had a belief, and comfort is the right word, but acceptance, that in my mind at least, it's very, I think life is very cyclical, and I see it with the composting, and I'm kind of seeing it now as we go through this process with the cemetery. You know, we all come and go, and we all come back around, and we all end up as earth and dust and dirt, one way or the other. And to me, uh, that's a very nice thing to think about for me,
Mhm.
and I find that very very okay and comforting, and one of the things that I guess for me is changing since I've been working in the cemetery. Um, the cemetery has almost become a creative outlet. Um, One of the things I do with the composting after we've picked up a horse, and Michelle has placed the horse in the windrow and she's doing her thing, I'm cleaning the truck and the trailer, and almost all the horses we get have a halter on. And
Mhm.
we've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of halters. And one of the things I do, the very last thing I do after I've gone through my whole process and my whole routine and the whole ceremony of taking care of the horse, is I take the halter and I hang it on. I've created a halter garland.
Oh.
And so I've got loops and all these halters interconnected with each other, loops and loops and loops and loops of them. And that to me is very it's a very nice way for me to close my part of that horse's death process, because sometimes it gets hard with these horses, and I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, I now this halter is connected with all these other halters, and it's just a thing I do, and it's very meaningful to me, and it's very important for me. And so now with the cemetery, I'm finding myself doing a very similar thing with this rock wall that I started building.
Mhm.
Right when you enter the initial trail entering the cemetery, there's a long stretch, maybe 30, well, it's not that long, maybe 30 feet, where there's just this natural place where you want, like, there just needs to be a rock wall there. And
Right.
I'm not very good at rock walls, but I love doing them. I've done a lot of them. Um, and I just started putting together this rock wall with all these loose rocks that are all over the place. This is New England. There's granite. We're just lousy with rocks. Okay. There's just rock. It's
Love
ridiculous.
it.
There's rocks everywhere. And so I've been putting together this rock wall, and one of the things that I've been doing or that I'm going to encourage families to do, and we did this with William, when we dig a burial plot, I take all the rocks, most of them are small, small rocks.
Mhm.
I take them and I set them aside, and then once the burial is complete, anybody in the family or anybody who's there can take one of the rocks or all the rocks or any of the rocks and add them to this rock wall.
Oh, I love
And one
it.
of the things, and I can envision in my mind in 30 years when I'm 60 or 70 or whatever, I can just picture this rock wall. It's small now, and I can just picture this rock wall being absolutely full and beautiful and squared with the trail, and
Oh.
just all of those rocks will have come from burials.
Yeah.
Um, and for me, that's become a very important part of the process, uh, and the memorial garden too. I mean,
Mhm.
um, we've spent a lot of time developing this memorial garden that we ultimately are going to grow it, and so that it becomes an asset for pollinators. But every time I'm in that pollinator garden, I think of my friend Siri, who passed away. She committed suicide in 2020 when she was 30. I'm sorry, 2021. No.
No.
Anyway, and her name is Siri. Siri is Iris spelled backwards. She was named after
Oh, how lovely.
the iris, an iris plant.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's so weird when you become older than your friends were when they died. And I
Mm-hmm.
think about that too, and I'm like, oh my God, where did life just happens, life just keeps on happening. And now all of a sudden I think of these friends that died in their 20s and early 30s, and I was younger than them when they died. And now I'm older than them. And it's like, oh God. So the cemetery has been a very nice healing space. And I think about those things and how it's impacted me. And I think if I can just make, not me, not I, if we can just make this space, this forest, this land, this cemetery, if everybody that comes here can get some sort of enjoyment or leisure or rest or comfort from the things that we're doing here, then that's the goal. That's the whole point, is to have a nice space where people can come, whether they're on cemetery business or not. I mean, it's just it's a nice place to be.
Yeah.
Well, that was probably a long drawn.
No, that was beautiful. I love that. A place of healing and peace, which I think is very
Yeah.
important.
For me, I mean, in terms of how it impacts me, or perspective on death, I don't think it's changed my perspective on death a whole lot. I've been involved with, I, I'll back up, I guess. From the time that I was 12 years old, I was volunteering at our local humane society, and was very painfully aware of the fact that, you know, more than 4 decades ago, that there were a whole lot more animals being euthanized for overpopulation then
Right.
than there are now. And being around that on a daily basis, and working there for years and years, and then also working there as an adult, being around that every day, and eventually becoming a licensed euthanasia technician, um, you develop some very interesting um, perspectives, ideas, thoughts, traumas, um, about all of that. And it's there are some very awful things about all of that that I carry with me. I probably more so than I know. Um, how that impacted me emotionally and physically, probably even in some cases. And it can weigh very, very heavy on you.
Right.
But thankfully, I've always been involved in those situations, and working for veterinarians as well, where there was always a good team of people. We were always very conscious about taking care of ourselves and each other, and having, in later years, not initially, but talking about the compassion fatigue and that sort of thing, and addressing it, making sure that had a professional
Right.
nearby that you could talk to. It was absolutely necessary. And with the work with compassionate composting, and the number of deceased horses and other animals that we deal with on a almost daily basis, um, that gets very heavy at times as well. And you have to figure out how to deal with it, and how not to become very jaded and
Right.
very sort of closed off from the emotion of it all. And if you do, I've said this I have people ask me all the time, how did you start this business, this, composting business? And as I, sort of tell them about it, I say, if it gets to the point where I don't feel this anymore, then I've got to be done. If I
Right.
don't feel it, if it doesn't move me in one way or another, or if it gets to the point where I'm not feeling like I'm providing as much respect for that animal, and obviously in this case, humans,
Right.
um, then it's time for me to be done with that. Um, so it's definitely a balance. You've got to every once in a while, you have to take a step back and take a deep breath, or a very many series of deep breaths, and try to reset so that you can come back to the reason why you started these things in the first place. If you lose
Sure.
sight of that, then you got to be done. And I think too many people in too many professions start things for the right reasons, and do a really good job for a certain amount of time, and then whatever the reason, whether it's money or society or whatever the reason, if it moves you away from why you started it in the first place, you really need to rethink what you're doing.
I 100% agree with that. But I mean, the two of you, and just like Mel, you guys have big hearts. And you're so compassionate and passionate. You're compassionate and passionate
Yeah.
about giving these animals and giving these people somewhere beautiful to be, and so that those who want to remember them can go and have some peace and stuff. And I'm so glad you're doing it. I'm glad that you decided to take your land and turn it into I mean, now obviously we know, excuse me, your land will be forever conserved now because of what you're doing.
Right.
Um, but it brings I think, a bit of hope to people who maybe, again, when we think of death in more traditional terms, hopefully this brings them some peace thinking about where they could be or where they can put their family and their loved ones. And I really do look forward to seeing more life force open up. As much as I love traditional cemeteries and the artwork and the headstones and that type of
Yeah.
thing, I do think from our modern perspective going forward, we have to rethink about how we are putting people into the ground and how we're
Right.
honoring death and the earth and everything at the same time. And I think you guys have done a phenomenal job with the Life Forest Cemeteries of doing that for everyone. And so I'm thankful Mel reached out to you in her research and that it
Yeah.
led to
Yeah.
the formation of cemetery number 2.
Right.
Yeah.
Are there any upcoming events? I know at Hillsborough, they've done several events and things. Do you guys have anything coming up or any initiatives that you'd like to share with the audience today?
Yeah, so we are in the process of planning our first annual summer solstice celebration at the cemetery. We're going to have, so it'll be June 21st, 2025. It'll be a celebration of the light, the longest day of the year. We're going to have an open house. We're going to have about 25 vendors. We'll have some artisans. We'll have some
Oh,
local farmers with their produce and meats and wares. So we're calling it kind of a artisan fair and farmers market. We'll be there giving tours. I'm hoping we can have a food truck. TBD. But we'll be there talking about what we do. We'll have a booth there, and we're hoping to bring in a big crowd. So this will kind of be our version of the midnight market that they do in Hillsborough, right around Halloween. Ours will be during the day. I think we're going to do 12 to 4. And we'll do that. We're hoping to do that annually, or we're intending to do that annually. And June 21st, 2025 will be our inaugural venture.
what a way to
And
celebrate the solstice. I think
yeah,
that's lovely.
um, and be on the lookout as well for, we have some plans in development for utilizing the land as an outdoor classroom.
Oh,
We
cool.
are drafting, brainstorming some ideas on things like forage tours, tree identification series, a summer and a winter tree identification series, walk with a forester.
Oh, I love
We're
that.
we're very, very big on wildlife habitat and pollinator, bee and butterfly
Mm-hmm.
populations, hence the pollinator garden. But we have bird houses and bat houses. We love bats. Oh my God, the owl. We've got owls.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we also want to have you know bird surveys. Those are things that are still in development. But if folks follow us on any of the social medias or sign up for our newsletter, those are things that'll all be coming up throughout 2025 and from there on out. But the big one is going to be the solstice celebration on June 21st.
Oh, I love that. And I will be sure we'll
we have
link all of that in our
several.
show notes.
Yeah. Oops, sorry. We
Nope.
have several vernal pools on the property, and we have participated in the past in what they call the Great Amphibian Migration.
Yeah, it's called Maine Big Night.
Maine Big Night. And so it's basically a citizen driven research project, and folks who are interested can go and sign up for particular locations that they've identified as road crossings for amphibians when they're crossing, leaving their vernal pools to go
Across the street
across the street
the other vernal pools
for mating purposes and whatnot. And it's grown quite big here in Maine, and we have the entire frontage of our properties here, because both there are actually 3 parcels of land that were all purchased at 3 different times, but it actually all used to be one farm 100 years ago, and it was divided to go to different parts of that family, and we've managed to buy all 3 of those parcels to put it all back together. But yeah, the entire frontage of both sides of the road of those properties is part of that research initiative.
Oh, that's so cool. Well, I will make sure that we have everything linked in the show notes. So folks that are, especially if you're in the Auburn, Maine area and you're interested in either using them as the actual cemetery and doing burials and stuff there, you can contact obviously Michelle and Chelsea and take care of things that way. But if you're interested in any of the events coming up and all these really cool nature activities, we'll have everything linked in the show notes. So make sure you check them out. And if you're looking for things to do, especially when the weather's nice and you want somewhere to go to get out of, the city and do something that's, obviously not going to cost you a bajillion dollars, and you can take the kids and you can take the dogs and you could do all of this. These Life Forest cemeteries, that's what they're there for. I mean, they're there for burial services, but they're also there for people to really get back to nature and enjoy nature. So, thank you guys for all of your hard work to do this and bringing Maine its first Life Forest. And we wish you a lot of success going forward. And I can't wait to see how everything works with the summer solstice event and all the other activities that you guys are planning. So congratulations on your opening, and we'll keep track of you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
We thank you for taking time to join us today for this ordinary, extraordinary chat. To learn more about today's discussion, please visit our website, theordinaryextraordinarycemetery.com, where you will find additional links in our show notes. And if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to give us a like and subscribe to our channel, The Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery Podcast. This really makes us more visible to others on YouTube who may also enjoy our podcast.
And please don't forget to visit us on social media, where we share all kinds of cemetery photos, quotes, tidbits, and more. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, and on X at Ord Extra Sim. So ORDEXTRACEM. If you enjoyed this or any of our episodes, please consider leaving a 5-star review and a comment on Apple's podcast, Spotify, or directly on our website. You can also leave those same comments on YouTube. Your positive reviews and enthusiasm for our show help others who love cemeteries and history to discover us and all of our ordinary, extraordinary stories. And if you're feeling extra generous and want to help support the podcast in a financial way, you can now buy Diane and I a cup of coffee, either through YouTube or on our website. Simply click on the coffee cup icon and it will allow you to make a donation.
Until we meet again.